Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Dive In podcast. I'm Kristian.
Hey everyone, it's Jessica Vandenberg. Thanks for joining us. We are so excited today to have our long-term friend, Julie Stauch, on our show. Kristian will get to her bio in just a minute, but we were talking about how hard it was to watch all the targeted states go down, all of them. And then I was reminded that one of the targeted areas, which is Nebraska too, did not. And Julie is here because she was general elections director there. And Kristian's going to tell you a little bit more about Julie before we get into the discussion.
Well, Julie is not only our friend, we've been friends a long time, right, Julie? I mean, it's
20 years at least, right?
Let's
Yes.
be honest, okay?
Yes.
Yeah, and all good though. And so when I started in, Iowa back in the day when I met Jess, and I was introduced to this Iowa political machine, which by the way, I still think is one of the best in the country. I mean, if you want to learn politics, go to Iowa. And I did. So I met Jessica, but then I also met Julie, who is just a phenomenal person and strategist and analyst and knows a lot about how to turn people out and how to get people to the polls. And again, we were talking about this a little bit, Julie, before, is that we've been in this business a long time, right? And I just feel like, I don't know about you guys, and I certainly don't want to speak for you, but doesn't it feels like we're at a tipping point or something's changing or, and I feel a little adrift. And so one of the things that Julie did, as Jessica just mentioned, during this cycle was work on Nebraska 2, which I'm going to let Julie explain the significance of Nebraska 2 in a presidential contest, because I really believe that I'll leave something out, but it's really important, especially in this environment where it's so polarized and every vote counts, right? So Julie knows a little bit more about what's happening, in my opinion, just jump in, about what's going on in these rural red states. More than me, for sure. So, Julie, welcome to the Dive In podcast.
Thank you.
Julie also has an extensive background in all things from government to events to managing big races, managing small races, right? She has been famous for putting together huge events overseas, but also helping famously in Iowa, at least, the auditor's race, which flipped. There's all these little small things she does. I would say she's a serial entrepreneur with a lot of ideas about how to make change. And she's very driven.
She's very driven, yes.
More than me, for sure. So It's fun to watch when the new ideas pop up and going to places and trying to get information and trying to get things funded and doing things outside the box. So we're glad to have Julie here. So Julie, anyway, we will turn it over to you. I know that Kristian, tell us about Nebraska 2. We haven't had anyone on the show who was actually working directly on the campaign. So you have insights that if you're willing to share them, great. But we would just love to get your thoughts and feelings about things as we are 3 weeks out of 2 weeks. Oh, we're only 2 weeks out of election
day.
I
know.
Feels like a lifetime. Sorry, Julie. Welcome. Thanks for coming.
Thank you. Glad to be here. Always great to catch up with the two of you. I'm sure I'm going to try to keep myself from turning it into a gossip fest because we've known each other so long. We could do that.
Indeed.
But so Nebraska 2, the significance, and it amazes me how many times I've had to explain this, and we'll keep explaining it.
Yeah.
Nebraska is one of 2 states, Maine is the other, where they allocate their electoral college votes differently. They do it by congressional district. So whoever wins the congressional district wins an electoral vote. And then whoever wins overall gets the leftovers. And so the Nebraska's 2nd congressional district, which includes Omaha, it's parts of Douglas, Sarpy, and Saunders County, Nebraska. All of Douglas, but parts of the other 2. It has often gone blue, but not always gone blue. And so it's not one of those guaranteed spots. And throughout the summer, after I started on August 5th, there were a lot of articles coming out about how the blue dot might be the one thing that makes the difference to get Kamala Harris's campaign over the top. And hopefully Tony Vargas, who is the Democratic candidate for Congress there and ran a great campaign. And so somebody from National, a former colleague, because that's how it works, isn't it, guys? A former colleague, she called and she said, so there are these jobs in Nebraska. Would you be interested in going and doing one of those? Now, it was not on my list to go anywhere, but as it happens, my son and his wife live there. And I was like, okay, well, the housing would be pretty easy, I think.
Yeah.
And it was. They were marvelous about allowing me to camp out for 13 weeks. So I'm now up for 13 weeks of dog care is my promise to them, because they took me in, not all at once, mind you. It'll be every time they take a vacation. It'll be accrued, sort of 13 weeks. But so when I arrived, there was the Harris campaign director, and then myself, I was the general election director, and I was a Nebraska Democratic Party employee, not a Harris campaign employee. And so I knew going in, it was going to be a very hard lift. I mean, we were building a whole presidential campaign in a phenomenally short amount of time. All the people who thought it was a brilliant idea to have either to go to, like, some people wanted us to have a primary before the convention, to which I was bluntly saying to them, have you lost your mind? They're like, there's no way we could regroup after that because of just the whole process. So anyway.
Right.
But so when I arrived there, my first thing was to start hiring people as fast as I could. And, did a lot of hiring. We didn't actually get to where we were a full staff till almost the middle of September.
Wow.
Still impressive, because that was 30 days. And probably after, you went from at BidenForPresident.com to at HarrisForPresident.com, right? Where the campaign.
Well, they did. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I just went into the straight NDP role. I think the other thing was, like, the first week I took the stack of interviewed 23 people over 4 days.
Wow.
Then the next week interviewed about another 15 or 16. And we were kind of on a hold about hiring. And I was just like, we got to hire. We're competing with other states because everybody was hiring up. Anyway, we did get the hiring going, and, it was just, I knew it was going to be hard, but it was harder than anything I've ever done before. And I feel like I'm a broken record on saying that, but this was really a phenomenal lift to do. The thing that made it all work overall was the momentum on the ground was phenomenal. I've never seen anything like it. I mean, frankly, the momentum on the ground from Obama was nothing like what we were seeing there.
Wow.
We were getting Republicans coming forward. We were getting no party voters were coming forward. And we were, of course, getting Democrats coming forward, wanting to do work and wanting to help. And so the momentum was fabulous, and that really made a huge difference for us. I sat in on the battleground state call, and I've never done that before. I've always been managing a campaign where they check in. You got a tracker who checks in periodically, but not like we are on a team call with all these critical states. And they were blowing us out of the water. I mean, they were doing phenomenal work, every single one of the states. Every time we turned around, they were exceeding goals exponentially. We were not doing that well. I will not say how poorly we were doing, but we were not doing that well.
But can I ask a question? Have they been organizing in Nebraska too, as long as they've been organizing in Arizona, as long as they've been organizing in North Carolina? No. Okay.
No.
Okay.
No, all of those states they had been organizing in, I believe, for at least a year, and a few of them were for 18 months.
So why do you think it took them a while to get to Nebraska too?
Well, I don't really know. I can speculate that it was a decision that the Biden campaign was not interested in Nebraska too, And the Harris campaign was interested in Nebraska too, and that's why it got turned on after July, what was it, 23rd, I think.
So it's sort of a strategic move by the Harris campaign versus what Biden folks were.
I believe so.
Okay.
I believe so. I can't prove it, but I believe so.
Right.
Well, and then also, Julie, and hold that thought, but just a little wrinkle here. So also the Nebraska 2 also in case, in the very unlikely event that it went to a tie, that's where, for the electoral college, right? That's where Nebraska 2 was very, very important, because if it went to the House of Representatives being controlled by the Republicans, and there's a lot of people out there that don't know how this works, by the way. But so there, I think that was also like, oh no, we need to
play everywhere, or
well, we have to make sure we lock this down. And I think they had a better sense of Maine. But anyway, go ahead.
Well,
I see.
I think so. What shocked me in the end was just that we won, and we were the only one in that group.
Yep.
That won. And I had a great deal of confidence by early October that we could win.
Okay. Based on what, Julie? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. Well, basically, to me, campaigns are about people. And if you're focusing on people and giving them a place where they can find a role, you can grow exponentially. And so we had 2 different offices. We were trying to create a third one. We were just struggling with finding a place on the south side of Omaha. But we created spaces that were very welcoming to people, and we found roles for them. Like, they came in the door, we didn't let them out without finding something that they could do to help. And they kept coming back. And they kept coming back. And the other great thing we had is we had people come in from out of state, which was just phenomenal. Our first out of state group came from Missouri.
Interesting. Did you have Iowa people come over then, or?
A few Iowans, I think, came over, but I don't think they were people that I knew personally to say, oh yeah, I know. Like I couldn't drop a name here, but there were some people who came in from South Dakota who were, very committed. And then there were people who came from other states as well. I think to me, the key was we created a space, we created motivation for them to excel and to bring the best that they could bring. And they did,
And do you think there was like something in the messaging beyond the momentum? Is there something special about what is basically Omaha versus what was happening in other states that, is it the demographic shift, or is it what do you think was happening? I mean, just out of curiosity, like if you had Kristian wants to say something, go ahead, Kristian.
Well, I was just going to say, when you do talk about, Omaha as it's, there's a lot of states that have your urban center, right? And it tends to be more blue. But let's talk about that a little bit, because we're not going to suggest on any level that Nebraska is a blue state, right? So I just talked through that a little bit.
Okay. Well, so Nebraska is actually a pretty old city because of the people coming up, or Nebraska. No, Omaha is a pretty old city, not Nebraska. But because of explorers coming up the river, and also because between Omaha and Council Bluffs is where the railroad first started, there is a large minority population compared to other Midwestern states. So that is not big, but it is larger than most other Midwestern states. And so where, in Iowa, I think it's more like 10% max of minorities.
Statewide, like versus
right?
Like I would say Des Moines, right?
Yeah,
or Waterloo,
statewide. Yeah. Statewide. In Nebraska, it's closer to 15%.
Like non-white population, are they
Hispanic? So anyway, the line is that help, but also those are populations that require more focus on turnout and getting them out to vote. It was just like really and truly, it was all kinds of people coming together that made it work, you know, and that's what I can say about that. Is Omaha is very different from the rest of Nebraska too. So it's much more of as a political science professor told me, Omaha is like the backwoods descriptions and some books on cultures and settling. Anyway, the bottom line is that it's a very, very affluent community, but it also has a lot of disparity in income. So that's the other thing that I would add on that is just that bit. And I think there was more to your question, but I forgot what the rest of it was.
It's interesting because, and we don't need to get into this too much, but like I see these interesting things, trends, if it's okay to use that word here. It may not be it might not be ripe enough to call a trend yet. But you see it kind of in Kansas. You see it in Utah. They're conservatives, no doubt about it. But they don't like the Trump brand of conservatism.
Right.
Or they don't like Trumpism. Right. They are conservatives. So let's not, there's no doubt about that. But they don't like the name calling and the lying and they don't like all that. And so let me ask you this. Having spent time, and again, I know there's a lot of stuff we're skipping over, but when you look at like a Kansas or a Utah, I mean, Utah also to me feels right because they don't like Trumpism. They're conservatives, but they don't like Trumpism. And I think the party as it is going it's going to go full bore down that road because they think it works, right? Trumpism. So tell us, what's the approach here? And Jess, too. I mean, being from Iowa, you both are from Iowa.
I mean, I feel like, Julie, you can go ahead and answer that because I didn't witness it. We did, I didn't witness what was happening on the ground, particularly for Kamala. We did other work, right? So there is a difference between if you're talking about Republicans from South Dakota or Republicans from Omaha or Republicans even from Nebraska coming in. I think there's also an interesting phenomenon that I love Julie's insight on, particularly with Nebraska, where there was a independent candidate.
Yeah.
We would like to hear about that because I think when you talk about even Iowa, but let's say Utah, Idaho, if there's enough of these folks who don't like the Republican brand, and we know they maybe don't like the Democratic brand either. So what does that look like for the future? Like with a Dan Osborne or those type of people?
Yeah, and I had been talking with Dan Osborne's campaign for a year. I started talking with them a year ago in October, and I went and met with Dan, and there was a cadre of Dans on that campaign, but his campaign manager was also named Dan, and for a long time his communications director was named Dan. And I finally, after one thing, I just said, no more Dans can be hired here. We're done. We're over Dans here. But anyway, they wanted me to come run the campaign, but not pay. And, I don't do that. And so, but what I did offer is that they could call and I would help troubleshoot. And so we've been in touch off and on all year. I really thought he was going to pull it off.
I did too.
And frankly, I think the target turnout for the second CD was 323,000. It was growth, and it was big growth. We had growth in the second CD, but we did not get as high as the 323,000 turnout. It was, I believe, 250 or 225, something like that.
Okay.
And so I think had we achieved that higher turnout, we would definitely probably have seen Tony Vargas cross the line. We would definitely probably have seen Dan Osborne cross the line, but it was still growth from any election previously. They have a really great ballot box system in Nebraska that I just wish we had that here, because it makes absentee voting so much easier, at least in the counties where they want to make it easier. In Douglas County, which is where Omaha is, they had 13 different locations. And even as such, to vote early in person, you had to go, there was only one location. And from day one, they had lines running about 2 to 3 hours from day one, because there were so many people who were wanting to vote prior to the election and not wait till election.
Well, I think Republicans have been pretty successful at, diminishing the vote due to I don't know exactly what the laws are in Nebraska, but here in other states where, they put you as as an active, or, you have one location you can vote at, or you have multiple locations, but for whatever happened. So, are you going to wait in line for 3 hours? Are you going to go on election day? How hard is it to do? There's a lot of that where even the smallest issues can be big issues to get to that extra, whatever, 75,000, 25,000 votes that you were talking about. I mean, I particularly, in a state like ours, that makes a big difference, because you're mitigating votes where we're not going to do as well. So it hurts. It's hard to get that margin statewide if you don't have that ramped up. And, I wonder, did you see this surge vote happening in Omaha or in Nebraska too?
Yes. Totally did. I mean,
the Trump surge vote, or was
no? Oh, not the Trump surge vote. We saw them trying, but that's where the Blue Dot Group was a great help.
And tell us about the Blue Dot. Pretend like you know nothing about the Blue Dot Group. Tell us about that.
Okay. So a couple of years ago, when they won I think it was when they won for Obama, somebody coined the name, now we're the Nebraska Blue Dot, and the rest of the state is red. Okay. And then what happened is so there are several different groups, but this one guy and his wife, and of course I'm not going to remember their names, they started taking white foam core or corrugated board, and then painting one big blue circle in the middle of it and giving them away. And it just went wild. I mean, in my son's neighborhood, where I rarely see political signs, doesn't mean people don't have the opinions. You just don't often see signs. There were probably 25 or 30 Blue Dot signs around the neighborhood, because when I would drive out to go to work, I would go cut through this path, this sort of double Z path through the neighborhood to get onto Pacific. And I would just see all these Blue Dot signs. And
so was it completely organic? Like
completely. That's what I mean about part of it being the momentum. It was completely organic. The other piece of it was it was good. All of it was good. They got very caught up in the social aspects of it, which we've watched this happen with campaigns. And then not as many of them got involved with the work aspects. But they still had a great impact, and that impact helped us. So that finally near the end, the Trump campaign came in and they said they were doing this whole paid thing. I think it was part of Elon Musk's, and they had paid staff out canvassing, and there was a news story about it, I think in the Omaha World Herald, or maybe it was the New York Times. And they came to some of our organizing stuff and then went.
Really? So they sort of infiltrated.
No, not the Trump people, the news people did. And then they went and did. No, it would be a little hard for them to infiltrate, just because they were so blatant in so many other ways but then they started doing like orange dot signs, not red, orange,
right?
And then like somebody got a great idea to put a hair on it to be like Trump, and it just, they were laughable for whatever reason. Those signs were laughable, and I can't really tell you why, other than every time I saw one that was something different. It made me laugh. I'm like, you guys are like way behind, and like, these look stupid.
So what did you learn, like, sort of vis-a-vis in these other states versus what you guys were doing that you think, could you tell what could have made some difference, or,
I can't pass judgment on the other states because I
of course
simply
not, but
don't know other than what the metrics were. But the thing I can say is I think we're measuring the wrong stuff. I think we've been doing that for a while, but I never had any way to sort of validate that. It was just a gut feeling. And now I can look at it and say, or as someone smarter than me said the other day, what the problem is, because I was talking about how we're measuring the wrong things. And they very concisely said, we measure what our workers are doing, not what people think.
Yeah.
And so, and you both have been there in the trenches. You can see what that is. We're measuring numbers of doors, not numbers of conversations held.
Right. Or what they said, or what
they said,
yeah,
what the conversations were. Right. Yeah. That's more complicated to measure, but
yes, for sure.
It's more valid and it's more useful.
We texted 150,000 people, or we knocked on this many doors, but it feels like that's a 2016 lesson that we didn't learn. I hate to say that, but that's what it feels like.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of lessons that we aren't very good at learning. And it's because I think part of that's because too many people want to rush to conclusions. I mean, like, to be honest, if another journalist writes a pundit piece on, what went wrong with this election, like, I will be done with journalists for life. Because, like, every journalist that I've talked to in the last 15 years, and you know how it is, we get to talk to a lot of them largely because of the caucuses. They come with a ready-made story, a fill-in-the-blank story, and they're just wanting one line from you.
Yeah.
They don't really want to learn how things work. They don't really want to learn what the influence is like, how to make it work. They don't care. They got a story. They got to submit it on a deadline, and they've got it all written. They just need you to give them the quote they want. That, to me, is another part of the overall problem. But it's like, it's not like pundits will not be able to identify what really went south in all of this. And I think the hardest thing was that, Kamala Harris did a great job as a candidate. Tim Walz was amazing also as a candidate. Together, they were a dynamic duo, and no, like, sarcasm implied there, but literally they were very good together and just took on this phenomenal lift with great spirit, and they created the momentum. Kamala started it and Tim added to it. And that momentum was what was bringing people out. And when I was the person who wisely stated it was, we're not measuring the people, that individual said to me that, the momentum was everywhere that she had been. And she had been to multiple states. She said she was seeing it everywhere. It was phenomenal.
Can I tell you something I'd heard to get both of your reactions, just because I value your opinion? And I think, Julie, especially as someone who's like in it, because I was on a call with some national folks who I do work with. And I said, why was the polling so wrong? And their response was the polling was wrong in states that weren't targeted, that we were either tied or behind always in the polling, in the internal polling, in some of the polling. But the polling was most off in states like Texas and Iowa and places where they weren't targeted states. That's what I had heard from this person who had seen more polls in targeted states than I had. I don't know what is your response to that. I mean, I tend to think, well, there's a surge vote that happened that the pollsters are getting wrong, but people were saying actually the polling in these targeted states was right. And we weren't doing as well the entire time. It doesn't have to just be about polling. Maybe it's about a drag or the Joe Biden stuff or, wrong, whatever. What are your thoughts on that?
I think, okay, so I'm going to pull way back to answer that question. because my answer is that we oversimplify this process and we forget. I don't know, did you guys ever read Hal Malchow's book, Reinventing Political Advertising? I'm going to geek out for a second. But in there, he wrote about Dr. Drew Weston and that people make emotional decisions in politics and only emotional decisions. They do not make rational decisions. Some of what happens with polls, like the Iowa poll, for example, that come late like that, is they create a reaction. What we don't know is what direction that reaction is going to go. And someone speculated to me here after I got back here that they felt that poll actually complicated and brought out Trump people that weren't going to come out.
Yeah.
And because it triggered a backlash. Sometimes it triggers a forward wave. Sometimes it triggers a backlash. I think the bigger mistake out there, and I have thought this for a while, is we continue, and I'm speaking broadly of Democrats, we continue to narrow and narrow and narrow who we're going to back, who we're going to resource, what states we're going to help. It doesn't matter how you describe it, whether you're describing it inside the DCCC, the DSCC, or writ large amongst the states by the DNC. We've narrowed those targets too much.
Yeah.
We need to be in more states. Like, remember in the, I mean, I talk about dating yourself, but in the in politics, there were a lot more swing states, and they always targeted more states. They didn't get all of them, but if you target wide enough, you can afford to lose some. But they're targeting more narrowly, and therefore we cannot afford to lose any.
Well, I think you're right. I think the good examples are in these states where some of these congressional races popped, where we could have potentially won here, or in other places where they had very narrow places where they're like, this is our path to whatever. There's a race here we lost by under 800 votes. And I was talking to people, we couldn't get them to come in. Now, some of the national folks came in big, but had there been early, like you talked about how you started this campaign so late in Omaha and CD1 in Iowa, and these two places, had they been door knocking, organizing, having conversations with voters last summer, we probably would have had a different conversation. Even with the headwind, we probably would have had a different conversation.
And that's the other piece, Jess. The other piece of this is that the Republicans work year-round, 24/7. We don't.
Yeah, or Americans for Prosperity do, but like whoever it is, it
doesn't matter. If they're doing it for the Republicans, it's for the Republicans.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
And we don't do that,
No.
And we used to. We used to do that. And that's when we did that, we would win.
Right.
So, I mean, I think that's a big part of it. But I do think, to your point about a big sea change going on, do you remember Eric Schnorr? He just published an article, forward it to you guys afterwards, but about what he thinks it is. And he came at it from a completely different direction than I thought he would. And it is fascinating. Time will tell whether or not he's accurate or not, but it is fascinating. I've
heard a couple of interesting things from people too, and I know we're like 5 minutes out, but one talks about how we have to have a major reform agenda, lead with economic reform, maybe other things, like just talk about how we need change. I'm not talking about nationally, maybe Kristian, but particularly in states like ours where, we're sort of status quo, right? In some ways, like we don't,
I would say paralyzed.
Yeah. And I made a comment this week, and not to get too nitty gritty in the weeds, but a lot of Democrats in states like this, right, ran on abortion, education, and the economy. And we lost two of those, or we're tied to those. And we knew that walking in, we didn't, so we're talking about these things. And it's like, how do you hone in on what the Democratic message is? Like, how do you have an umbrella message that Republicans have because they talk about the same thing: immigration, taxes, and like it's
I'm going
a
to
state.
disagree with you. I'm going to disagree with you for this reason.
Well, Trump doesn't, but I'm talking about
No. Let me finish. The subject matter may seem to be the same, but we do it in a full rational way, and they do it in an emotional way.
Yep.
And emotional is what is actually engaging people, not the cold rational. We need to stop. And we also, and I'm guilty of it. I'm doing better, but we also have to stop patronizing people as if we're smarter than everybody else, because that is not helping the team at all.
Do you think their emotional connection is more based out of fear, or do you think that there is a real emotional connection that they have with voters that we just are super lacking?
These people
I
don't think
care
I
about
can answer
you.
that. I think that's another podcast for us to discuss. But no, just kidding. Not trying to claim your time. But I just think it's a lot more complex than that. But if you haven't read Hal Malchow's book, please do.
Okay, that's helpful. Any last words of wisdom from the winning dot?
The blue dot. Momentum is everything, and people are everything, and that's what matters. And all the other stuff is just busyness and dressing. But we really have to build those relationships with people and connect with them. We can look back recently here in Iowa and presidentials, the two campaigns in 2019 and 2020 that did that were Pete Buttigieg and Bernie Sanders. They were the ones that connected with people. The rest of them were like doing the standard she, whatever. I don't know what the right word is for it.
Yeah.
And not engaging with people where they were.
Yeah. We could talk about whether Iowa should be first in the nation again, maybe at another time.
I would love to talk about that.
I mean, that's another conversation. But Julie, thank you so much for joining us. This is a quick one, and we had a few sound issues probably on my end and everywhere else. But we're grateful to have your insight. We're glad that you came here. Congratulations. I know it wasn't probably easy to do so well when things didn't go so well, but you have to feel good about the work you did over there.
Yes, indeed.
We did great work there. And so no shame in that.
Right. Agreed.
The way I always look at these things, last thing is I put on tunnel vision, and it's, this is my job. This is the thing we have to do. And that's what I share with the people. Don't look at any of the other states. Don't focus anywhere else.
Advice.
This is the only thing that matters to us.
Right.
And that's what we have to work on. So with that happy note.
Yeah.
Thank you. Good philosophy.
But yeah, thanks so much, Julie. But I'm going to do a little wrap up. So if you guys have any questions or comments for Jess and I, just email us at the diveinpod@gmail.com, and we'll be happy to get in touch. And as usual, thanks for joining, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you.